Night enveloped the ancient palace walls in Sierra Alta. Not just a mere darkness, but a heavy, stifling curtain woven from black velvet and centuries of secrets. Within these southern walls, steeped in sunlight, the silence was oppressive, unnatural. In the terraced gardens, not a single cypress branch stirred. The massive, bronze-clad gates seemed afraid to even breathe, lest they disrupt the stillness in which darkness itself held its breath. It sensed that now, in the depths of the stone labyrinths, something was about to begin that was destined to remain invisible to the world, yet forever imprinted upon the soul of one young woman. In the ringing silence came the click of a key in the lock, and the oak door to the bedchamber closed tightly behind the last lady-in-waiting. A solitary candle, held in a wrought silver holder, cast trembling, uncertain shadows across the room. On the tapestries, where the golden lions and lilies of Lausanne were intricately woven, the beast's eyes seemed to come alive, observing the unfolding drama. In this flickering, suffocating darkness, Eleonora Valois, Princess of Lausanne, stood like a marble statue, silently awaiting the inevitable. She slowly, with dignity, sank to her knees by the high bed, burying her face in the cool, slick silk pillows, instinctively seeking refuge in them. Perhaps this costly fabric, embroidered with threads from a foreign land, could shield her from the mounting, icy fear, from the pain that always followed, and, above all, from her husband himself. My lord, let him be kinder today than he was yesterday. Let his fever not consume me entirely, she whispered, but her voice was merely a sigh that instantly drowned in the folds of the satin. Her heart, long cold and wise, knew with certainty there would be no mercy. Never. Don Raoul, Prince of Sierra Alta, heir to the United Kingdom of Almanza, transformed within the walls of their bedchamber. He shed the mask of fragile, pale beauty he wore at court. His touch knew no tenderness. It was filled with a dry, scorching fire that consumed every human feeling. He did not seek her love, nor desire her soul. He demanded, as if wishing to tear out something sacred that, by her nature, she could not, and did not want to, give him. He saw her only as a vessel for his lineage, beautiful but silent. Eleonora had learned to be the perfect mirror of his frantic, feverish desires, cold, speechless, detached. Her body submitted, but her mind flew far away, to the snowy mountains of Lausanne. She knew how to be silent. From her earliest childhood, she had been taught that princesses who bore the burden of an empire had no right to cry, no right to resist. Their only duty to the crown was to endure. This marriage was never a union of two hearts intertwined in tender youth. It was a carefully calculated, cold transaction. By its terms, her body belonged to the crown of Almanza, while her soul remained in majestic, unwavering solitude. She had known of this destiny since she was 4 years old, when her name was first uttered in long, tedious negotiations, encrypted among land titles, amounts of tribute, and royal designations. At 6, her dowry was already being discussed by ambassadors. At 8, she was viewed not as a child, but as the future mother of kings, a coin minted for the great game. Love, the old nurse had scoffed, adjusting the heavy brocade gown on her when Eleonora turned 12. Love, my child, is for commoners, for peasant girls. You, Valois, you are born to suffer. Such is your fate, to carry your cross. And now, in the deep, oppressive shadow of the carved canopy, fear squeezed her chest, like an invisible hoop. Her pulse beat fast and almost inaudible, like the wings of a caught bird fluttering against the bars of its golden cage. She did not hear his steps. She felt them. His scent, a mix of sharp musk, expensive wine, and a feverish, unhealthy heat, signaled the imminent onset of the storm. In his eyes, where obsession smoldered, she always saw the frightening shadow of madness, the very same that even his mother, the powerful Queen Leonora, feared. He did not understand that he caused her pain, or, what was even more terrifying, he understood, but sincerely believed his right to her was supreme and undeniable. If this child survives, if it is born strong and healthy, she whispered to herself, clinging to this thought like a drowning person to a straw. Hope for a child was her only shimmering light in this desolate southern darkness. Eleonora was born in 1482 in the ancient, gloomy Lausanne castle, in the very heart of her duchy, where vineyards scented the air beneath the mountain sun, and courtiers wove intrigues as sharp as daggers. She was the daughter of Duke Ferdinand I, ruler of the Eastern Empire, and his first, early departed wife. Her beauty, her lineage, and the wealth of her father's lands made her a legend even before she learned to walk. She was a special child, a symbol of alliance, a priceless key to the vast eastern territories, the most valuable coin in the great game of kings. Too small for such a monumental destiny, the old chancellor remarked thoughtfully, gazing at the infant in the cradle. She will either strengthen us forever or become our greatest loss. At the age of 3, her name was first betrothed to the Dauphin of France, the son of Louis XI. For this union, her father surrendered half of wealthy Lausanne, as if cutting a piece from his own heart, for the sake of peace with unpredictable France. Eleonora was sent to Paris, where she became a hostage in silk dresses. Her education was entrusted to Princess Mathilde de Châtillon, the king's sister, a woman with a mind as sharp as a razor and a heart as cold as the marble floor of the Louvre. You must become a piece on the board, Eleonora, not just a pawn, she instructed, adjusting the heavy, golden locks of the girl. In this world, kings play, but we, women, must learn to govern their moves. Eleonora diligently studied Latin, subtle court etiquette, the art of embroidery, and, most importantly, the art of concealing all emotion. She grew up amidst unimaginable luxury, but in deep, absolute solitude, surrounded by foreign, assessing faces that saw in her not a little girl, but only a future queen. At the age of 12, when court tailors were already sewing her magnificent wedding gown, fate dealt her its first, cruel blow. Charles VII, her fiancé, chose another, Princess Jean of Burgundy, whose lands, lying on the border with the Empire, were valued higher than her own Lausanne. You are no longer needed, they informed her, without the slightest regret or explanation. She was sent back, as if returning an unwanted, unnecessary gift. She did not shed a single tear, but as she ascended the steps of her ancestral castle, she looked at her father with eyes that had aged in a single night. "We will find another way, my daughter," Duke Ferdinand said, but there was not a trace of parental warmth in his voice, only cold, political calculation. At that moment, Eleonora realized her life belonged to the Empire, not to herself. Returning to Lausanne, she found a brief, fleeting moment of freedom. 4 years spent near her father became her only warm light. Duke Ferdinand, though a stern and despotic ruler, proved to be a caring father to her. He read her Plutarch, debated philosophy with her, and taught her to dissect the intricacies of diplomatic letters. "You could rule like a true man," he would laugh when she asked him questions as sharp as arrows. They rode out together at dawn, drank fresh milk in the stable. For the first time, Eleonora felt herself not a pawn, but a daughter. But peace is not meant for princesses. At 16, a new announcement reached her. She was betrothed to Don Raoul, the heir of Almanza. "Be strong," the Duke said, touching her shoulder. "Breathe, even if there is no air left. Such is our duty." She merely nodded, closing a heavy book. Nothing remained for her but to once again set forth toward her predetermined destiny, carrying the light of those few happy years as her only talisman. The sea raged as if alive, as if it knew it was carrying Eleonora Valois to a new, stronger cage. The ship, laden with her dowry and her trivial girlish hopes, tossed on the enormous waves like a toy in the hands of an angry god. The storm swept in from the west, heavy and low, as if the very sky portended disaster. Sails tore to shreds. Masts groaned like bones. Sailors shouted, their voices drowned in the deafening roar of the wind. Eleonora stood on the slippery deck, wrapped in a thick, dark cloak. Her golden hair wildly billowed in the wind, as if desperately trying to break free. The cold bit deep into her bones, but she did not flinch. "Your Grace, go below, to the cabin." Captain Ibanez, with a mustache faded by salt and sun, shouted to her. "The rocks are close. We are at the mercy of God." She slowly turned to him, and her gaze, calm and almost otherworldly, pierced the captain. "If the sea desires me, let it take me," she replied quietly, her voice surprisingly firm. "Better to drown free than to live in foreign chains." The captain, an old sea dog, fell silent, not from fear, but from unexpected deep respect. She stood there like a queen, not on a throne, but on a deck beneath a scowling sky, amidst waves that could become her grave. She was the embodiment of an unyielding will. But fate, as always, was capricious and spared her. On the fourth day, the storm receded, leaving the ship battered, but alive. In May 1498, Eleonora set foot on the soil of Sierra Alta. She was received as a future queen. Crowds roared, arches of fresh flowers swayed in the wind, and bells rang triumphantly. Yet the sound felt ominous, funereal to her. Amidst all this southern splendor stood he, Don Raoul, the heir of Queen Leonora. Young, incredibly fragile, with a face as pale as polished marble, he was beautiful with that delicate, sickly beauty that is frightening in its ephemerality. Anxiety smoldered in his eyes, like a man who knows his allotted time is short. He bowed and respectfully kissed her hand. And at that moment, Eleonora realized with sudden horror, he was truly in love. But she did not yet know that this love was not a blessed light, but a scorching, annihilating fever. "You are like the star I saw in my childhood dreams," he told her later, when they were alone in the reception hall. "I want to touch you so much, Eleonora, but I fear that at my touch, you will go out forever." She remained silent. Her silence was louder than any words or promises. His gaze desperately sought salvation in her, but she, a princess trained in calculation and pain, had no idea how to save one who was drowning in himself, in his own obsession. The wedding, held in June 1498 in the ancient Cathedral of Burgos, was a true triumph for the kingdom of Almanza. The cathedral shone with the gold of candles and jewels. Queen Leonora of Castile stood like a severe, unshakable monument. Her husband, King Fernando, concealed his political satisfaction behind a mask of a strict, unmoving smile. The alliance with mighty Lauzun strengthened Iberia, linking it to the Eastern Empire. Eleonora, in a dress of heavy, silvery velvet, was beautiful, but her heart beat steadily, devoid of any illusions or hopes. She knew this marriage was not her choice, but another brilliant move in the great game of kings. In the first, brief months, Don Raúl was gentle and kind. He dedicated flowery poems to her, spoke of the stars, and walked her for hours through the palace's shady gardens. "You are my only warmth, Eleonora," he whispered, barely touching her hand. "You save me." But this tenderness quickly, frighteningly quickly, turned into cruelty. His unhealthy passion transformed into a personal, consuming obsession that burned them both. At night, he came like a sudden, destructive storm, demanding her body, her breath, her soul. She endured, clenching her teeth until they ached, repeating within her inner fortress, "If the child is born, if it survives, then all this will not be in vain." This thought was her only shield. By the end of the summer of 1498, the court learned Eleonora was expecting a child. The palace halls rejoiced, but the happiness was short-lived. Don Raúl weakened every day, as if life itself was draining from him. His cheeks sank, and his eyes burned with a feverish, unnatural glow. He hardly slept, sitting for hours in the dark, as if imprisoned by his own gloomy thoughts. "You are my confession, my torment," he told her, squeezing her hand until the pain was unbearable. "I want you, Eleonora, but I feel myself dying, and you are to blame for everything." She stroked his sweat-damp hair, but her heart constricted with foreboding and fear. Queen Leonora watched her daughter-in-law with unconcealed, icy coldness. "You are too bright, Princess of Lauzun," she said one evening at dinner, her voice ringing with contempt. "My son, the only heir, is wasting away in your eastern light. You are his poison." Eleonora lowered her eyes to her hands, adorned with rings too heavy for her age. She did not understand her fault, but Leonora's words burned her like an unbearable hot brand. Courtiers whispered, calling her the foreigner, the siren, blaming her for the prince's weakness. And she only kept silent, bearing each blow as a queen carries herself with dignity. Raúl visibly faded before the entire court. Doctors spoke of pulmonary consumption, evil sorcery, and the unfathomable will of God. In October 1498, he was sent to Portugal to accompany his sister, Juana, to her wedding with King Manuel. "The sea air will heal his body," experienced physicians assured, but they could not heal his soul. Eleonora was not taken along. She remained in the enormous palace, pregnant, utterly alone, with a heavy shadow of fear in her chest. "Return alive," she whispered, looking at his receding, fragile figure, which seemed ghostly. But in the depths of her soul, she already knew he would not return. In November 1498, in Salamanca, within the gloomy walls of a monastery, Don Raúl died. He was only 20 years old. Before his death, in a delirium, he whispered her name, "Eleonora. Forgive me, I didn't have time." Queen Leonora, having lost her only son, now looked upon her daughter-in-law as a mortal enemy. "You brought us death," she cast, her words heavier than a stone thrown into the water. Eleonora did not reply. She stood by his heavy, carved coffin, pale but unbroken, with a child under her heart, understanding. She was left alone in a foreign land, a widow at barely 17 years old. In January 1499, the last hope for the child who could have become the heir to two great empires finally collapsed. Labor began prematurely in a small, dark room where the flickering candlelight was lost in deep shadows. Eleonora screamed not so much from the unbearable physical pain as from a freezing animal fear. "Save him. I beg you, save him," she pleaded with the midwife, squeezing her hand. But the silence that followed after it was all over was more terrifying than any scream. A dead girl, who never drew a breath of life, disappeared like an unwelcome fleeting dream. "Well, Fate?" Eleonora whispered, looking out at the dark, empty sky beyond the window. "Are you satisfied with me now? Have you taken everything?" The next morning, Queen Leonora entered her chambers. There was not a trace of compassion on her face, in her gaze, only hatred, aged like old wine. "You are free, Valois," she said. "There is no longer a place for you in Almanza. Go back to your father." Freedom, after the death of her husband, the death of her child, after her young life had been sacrificed to dynastic games. Eleonora did not argue. She rose slowly, like a frail old woman, and asked for only one thing: to take the casket with her favorite books, Aristotle, Plutarch, Cicero, her only reliable companions. In 1499, she left the kingdom of Almanza, without a title, without an heir, with a soul covered in deep scars. Aboard the ship carrying her away from Sierra Alta, she watched the southern coast slowly dissolve into the mist. "They tried to break me," she whispered to the wind, "but I will return, not as a wife, not as a pawn, but as myself." The sea caught her words, carrying them to new, unknown horizons. The return to Lausanne was bitter, but her father, Duke Ferdinand, gave her no time for tears and mourning. Regardless of everything, she still remained the most valuable figure in the political Game of Thrones. In 1501, he arranged a new marriage for her, with Duke Christoph II, ruler of Flanders. Young, raised at the brilliant French court, he was the complete, bright opposite of Don Raoul. Where the Spanish prince consumed her with his obsession, Duke Christoph offered her long-awaited, steady warmth and care. "I do not wish to be your master, Eleonora," he said, touching her hand during their walk in the shady gardens of Chambéry. "I want to be your home, your harbor after the storm." His simple, sincere words were like a ray of sunshine after a long, damp winter. For the first time in her life, Eleonora felt herself to be a living woman, not an instrument. Their marriage, concluded in February 1502, became her true salvation. The court in Chambéry in Flanders came alive. It filled with music, cheerful masquerades, and philosophical debates. Eleonora wrote letters to scholars, patronized artists, read Cicero at breakfast, and not in solitude. She laughed, for the first time in many years, and this pure, resonant laugh was like a bell in the silence. But, as often happens in novels, happiness proved incredibly fragile. In September 1504, Duke Christoph caught a cold while hunting, and his illness took a fatal turn. Experienced physicians prescribed bloodletting, herbal tinctures, and prayers, but the fierce fever did not subside. He faded away like a candle, but not in delirium, but with a clear, calm smile on his lips. "You are stronger than I, Eleonora," he whispered, clutching her hand. "Live for both of us. Never let them make you a pawn again." He died in her arms, leaving her a widow for the second time, at 22 years old. But this time, she was not broken. The pain of losing Christoph was different. Not humiliation, but a bright, deep sorrow. She buried him with dignity, as a husband and a friend. Now she was a widow again, but no longer a young, bewildered girl, but an adult, wise woman who had known not only pain, but also true, selfless love. This time, she did not await orders from her father, the emperor. She did not wait for someone to choose a new, advantageous path for her. She firmly refused all new proposals, including the very tempting alliance with King Henry VIII of England, who had not yet become famous for his future executions of wives. No more weddings, she declared with unshakable firmness in her voice. I am no longer a commodity. I have chosen a different path for myself. And the entire court of Flanders, holding its breath, accepted her will. From that moment, everything changed. She removed the mourning headdress to don another, invisible crown, the crown of will, reason, and power, the crown of a woman who had survived and was now ready to build not a foreign, but her own intellectual empire. The city of Ghent fell silent in heavy anticipation. No bells rang through the morning, September fog, nor did horseshoes clatter on the cobblestones. Servants trod soundlessly, as if the very house feared disturbing her, its mistress, its ruler. In the residence of Eleonora Valois, the windows were thrown open. The autumn light entered the room, tender as a mother's very last gaze. The air in the chambers smelled of old, beloved books, wax, and the rose-petal tincture that her loyal lady-in-waiting held to her pale, parched lips. She barely spoke now. Her face, thin and pale, seemed woven from parchment and ash, but her eyes remained clear, perceptive. With these eyes, she looked at the walls where portraits hung, not just paintings, but lives that had departed this world before her. There was Christoph, her second true love, young, cheerful, just as in the first months of their fleeting happiness. There was her mother, Maria of Lausanne, resilient, resolute, who did not know she would perish and leave her daughter to a world that could not be kind. There was Don Raoul, pale and beautiful, like an escaping memory of a dream that ended too quickly and tragically. And slightly further, young Charles, the one in whose hands she had once held the future of the empire. Tell me, ma tante, she whispered faintly, addressing the young, frightened physician who did not dare to look her in the eye. What do you fear more in life, death or a hollow, purposeless life? He lowered his head. He had nothing to reply. Before him lay a woman who had lived not just a life, but an era. She did not wear a queen's crown, but rulers governed by her hand. Emperors and kings bowed before her. The lady-in-waiting carefully adjusted the pillow, slipping soft, dark blue velvet beneath her shoulders. Eleonora looked out the window at the clear autumn sky. A good day for the last page, she said, as if she herself were composing her novel, in which she was now setting the decisive, final period when the priest leaned in to whisper the words of absolution. She stopped him with a weak motion of her dry hand. I have lived with faith, Father. Let it release me without further confessions. God has long known all that he needs to know. Her voice was neither penitent nor weary, but filled with an unshakable, regal dignity. The last question was posed by her beloved niece, the girl she had raised. Ma tante, do you regret anything? Eleonora smiled slightly, not with her lips, but with her eyes alone. Then slowly, Almost weightily, she pronounced, "I was born the daughter of the Empire, but I die, having become its mind." 2 days later, her body, clothed in mourning black and white silks, was carried through the streets of Ghent. The people stood in silence, not weeping, because on that day, not just a woman died. An entire era had passed,